Hello and welcome to Friday's edition of COVID-19. I'm Min San Hee. The most recent outbreak of the virus here in Korea is serving to highlight the importance of quarantine measures and of being aware that we are still vulnerable to contagion and thus need to be cautious. We start the program today, as always, with the headlines. I have our Kwon Soa and Noaram. Welcome.
Hi.
So I understand our numbers today have also hit above 50.
Yes, and this is actually why people start to ask themselves whether we will have to go back to strict social distancing measures. And that's why there have been temporary measures announced amid these cluster infections in the capital region. I think Aram is later going to introduce those measures. But first, let's take a look at our daily updates. We have 58 new cases confirmed this Friday. And what's fortunate is that for the third consecutive day, the death toll remains unchanged at 269. But due to these double-digit new cases, we also have double digits in people again getting quarantined, and also 23 people recovered from the virus in the span of a day. And let's go over to our map. All cases that we are seeing today are from the metropolitan area. 20 cases in Seoul, 20 in Gyeonggi-do province, and 18 in Incheon. And we have 3 imported cases, but no new cases that were detected at airport checkpoints. Now, largely due to new cluster infections in and around the capital, a total of 177 cases have been reported in the past 3 days. The most recent concern being the outbreak at a distribution center of e-commerce company Coupang. The facility in Bucheon led to at least 96 infections so far, with 70 of them being direct transmissions and the rest infections through other contacts. Authorities said as of yesterday, around 3,800 people in relation to the case have been tested for the virus, and some 500 tests remain. This is why the government is confident of detecting all cases tied to the logistics center, at least when it comes to direct contractions. The government, meanwhile, is to conduct thorough inspections on 32 distribution centers nationwide until June 1st. And these inspections would include whether these workers have been abiding by guidelines, such as not going to work when they feel sick, and also wearing masks and designating quarantine and monitoring personnel.
Elsewhere around the world, Brazil, which is the second worst hit in terms of total infections, has reported another record figure here.
Yes, the South American country has recorded its highest single-day surge in COVID-19 cases and also the second highest death toll in a day. More than 26,400 new cases were confirmed within 24 hours, with 1,156 new fatalities reported Thursday. The total number of deaths is now at least 26,700. According to an estimate by the University of Washington, the coronavirus is predicted to kill more than 125,000 people in the country by August 4th, and that's close to the almost 132,000 deaths estimated for the U.S. by the same date. Brazil has been showing higher daily cases in recent days than the U.S., and also entire Latin America is in fear as fragile health systems, political turmoil, and poverty are not helping in bringing those numbers down. And as of Thursday, some 850,000 people in Central and South America combined have been infected, with around 45,000 mortalities.
Meanwhile, in Europe, the UK and France are looking to ease their restrictions further.
Yes, these 2 European countries are one of the latest countries that have announced plans of easing restrictions. UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced relaxed guidelines Thursday, which includes the permission of 6 people to gather together outdoors, such as in gardens, beginning on Monday. They will have to stay 2 meters apart from each other, though. Johnson referred to these changes as a, quote, long-awaited and joyful moment that can bring families together. Under the current rules, people were only allowed to meet 1 person from another household in a public place. Johnson said the country has met the government's 5 requirements, including a consistent decline in the COVID-19 death rate. Meanwhile, France also announced its next step in relieving restrictions, as its Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said the ban on traveling more than 100 kilometers will be lifted lifted on June 2nd, and cafes, restaurants, and bars will reopen on that day as well, under strict measures such as no more than 10 people sitting together. And now let's take a look at countries with most infections around the world. On top, we have the U.S., followed by Brazil, and also Russia's cases are nearing 380,000. And moving to other regions, we have India, which now has more cases than Turkey, and also Peru is notable, seeing an increase just like other Latin American countries that are not on the list, like Chile, Mexico, and Ecuador. And moving over to our world map, we have a total of 5.9 million cases approaching the 6 million mark, and 362,010 deaths, and more than 2.57 million people have now recovered. And out of these cases, it looks like 98% of these people have mild conditions of the COVID-19 virus, and 2% are in serious or critical condition. 2% might seem like a small percentage, but that's some 53,975 people.
Right, so thank you for that. I'll come back to you after the regular briefing.
All right.
Arirang, concerns linger over cluster infections, which is why the government here is imposing stronger measures.
That's right. The government says the next 2 weeks will prove crucial in order to stop this spread of any further spread of cluster infections. And with this in mind, the government will close public facilities in the Seoul metropolitan area from today for the next 2 weeks until June 14th. Now, these include state-run parks, art galleries, museums and theatres alike. Additionally, government-run events will be cancelled or postponed. The government also suggested that private businesses follow suit and advised residents against going outside or holding events until June 14th as well. But the government said it will maintain the current, what it's calling everyday life distancing system, as the latest cases are still limited to a certain area. Students, meanwhile, are advised to avoid visiting private academies or internet cafes for the time being. But the Education Ministry says it will proceed with phased school reopenings as planned.
Right, staying with quarantine measures, I hear there are also tougher penalties, that is, for foreigners who break them.
That's right. From today, first-time violators who violate self-isolation rules will be fined 3 million won, or $2,500 US. That's a six-fold increase from the previous amount. Now, second and third-time violators will face fines of 5 million and 10 million won, respectively. Those are also significant increases. Now, in serious cases, foreigners could be deported immediately, and all foreigners, as we know, coming to Korea are required to self-isolate for 2 weeks, but some have breached these protocols, which has prompted these stronger measures. Now, some 18 foreigners were actually deported last month for breaking the rules. And also to note, the new rules also apply to Koreans coming in from overseas as well.
The pandemic has dealt a huge blow to cultural events, including film festivals here and outside of the country.
That's right. Korean Film Festival organisers are wondering how to run these events, if run them at all. And the majority of local festivals have decided to hold the events online. Now, this includes the Jeonju International Film Festival, the country's largest showcase of indie and art house films. It opened on Thursday, in fact, without an audience, and will run for 116 days. 98 titles are available online on the local streaming platform Wave for Korean viewers until June 6th. And the event's organisers also said it will have offline screenings of nearly all features and shorts from June to September 20th to give audiences an opportunity to see the films on a big screen after the online screening period. The Muju Film Festival is also set to open in a similar way next Thursday. But a few festivals will be taking place offline as well, despite the virus fears. One of them is the second edition of the Pyeongchang International Peace Film Festival. That will proceed offline from June 18th to the 23rd. But precautionary measures will be implemented, including cancelling some programs that raise chances of close contact between people, as well as limiting the number of audience members. Now, festivals abroad are also being postponed or cancelled. Now, the famous Cannes Film Festival, for one, won't be taking place this year, and there won't even be a shift to online screenings as well. And it was actually supposed to start a couple of weeks ago, but those plans have been scrapped.
I see. All right, Arirang, thank you for that. Have a safe weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
You too.
It's a little past 2 in the afternoon here in Korea, and as we wait for the regular briefing on COVID-19, here are a few reminders for our viewers about the quarantine measures in place to ensure public safety amid the latest outbreak of cluster infections. Tougher measures have been imposed by the government as of today until the 14th of June for Seoul and its surrounding areas, as our Noah Ram reported. State-run public venues, including museums, theatres and parks, are to remain closed and during this period, and those that choose to keep their doors open, the government is calling for stringent quarantine efforts to keep the safety of those who visit them. Meanwhile, the list of the top 5 daily life quarantine measures includes the wearing of masks, seeking to keep a healthy distance from those around you, washing your hands for at least 30 seconds, and remembering to ventilate, of course. In the case of air conditioners being used this summer, people are being advised to ventilate rooms at least once every 2 hours. Also, in the case of air-conditioned spaces without windows, users are being advised to wear face masks. Speaking of face masks, they are being recommended on all forms of public transportation here in Korea, including airplanes. And the slogan in the country amid the pandemic is far from body, but close at heart. So do make an effort to reach out to loved ones virtually and frequently. Now, while we still wait for the briefing to commence, perhaps we can take a look at the figures for today as reported by our consul. We have a total of 58 cases. As of this Friday, the total number of our infections now stands at 11,402. As Hua also mentioned, we have no deaths today, keeping our number at 269. Now, those in quarantine, the number for those in quarantine has been raised to 35. The total number of those in quarantine stand at 770. I understand that the briefing has been postponed to 2:20, so we'll bring it to you when it starts. For now, what we'll do is we'll turn to neighboring Hong Kong amid the Chinese parliament's endorsement of a national security law, which is raising concerns among world leaders over Hong Kong's future standing as a global financial hub. Now, these concerns come amid ongoing efforts to keep the virus at bay. For more on the situation there, I have live on the line Professor Lian Hee Wee from Hong Kong Baptist University. Hello, Professor.
Hello, Sanhee. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Professor, let's begin with the COVID-19 situation in Hong Kong.
Well, there are now very few new cases. Everyone is still exercising good hygiene and practicing social distancing. However, there is an increasing number of people letting their guard down, and so some people are not as careful as before. In Hong Kong's fight against the pandemic so far, credit should go to the people and not to the government, which had demonstrably been arrogant and aloof since the beginning. And a recent ridicule coming from the distribution of panty-like masks that have been perceived as ineffective and even hazardous from the government. Hong Kongers relied on the lessons learned during SARS in 2003 and has largely mobilized themselves bottom up. Many believe that the Hong Kong government is more interested in using the pandemic for their political motives, which is infuriating to many of the Hong Kongers I interacted with. So the general situation is more of feelings, but the actual cases are very few right now.
I see. Well, that's good to hear. Professor, despite a government ban on any gathering of more than 8 people to contain the contagion, thousands of protesters have been taking to the streets over a controversial new security law. What is the public atmosphere there like?
Well, indeed, but every call for protest that I have seen reminds everyone not to congregate, to keep distance and to wear masks. Ironically, it is the authorities which had been caught numerous times behaving incongruently with their own regulations. In footages corroborated across different media, it seems it is the police forcing people into crowded situations or engaging in excessive violence, among other grievous misconducts. I wonder if the public has any trust or respect left in the authorities. There are, of course, some who blame the protesters for the situations that are arguably created by the inaptitude of the government. The blame game, however, could be easily clarified with an independent commission of inquiry that has subpoena powers. That would restore trust. So why such a move is not undertaken is anyone's speculation. Unsurprisingly, the public would speculate against those who seem to have something to hide. From the people I talked to, it appears that the new security laws have split Hong Kongers more widely into the group who hopes more eagerly for the economy to crash so that a fairer one can be rebuilt, and the group who fears more greatly that the economy would crash so that they would lose whatever they have benefited from the system that has made the rich richer while leaving youths with extinguishing hopes for housing, job security, and a free, fair, and just society. But more than ever, Hong Kongers feel the love from many in the world who have expressed that they stand with Hong Kong. Korean friends, for example, have been very forthcoming with support, and many Hong Kongers I spoke to are very grateful.
Professor, broadly speaking, how will China's passing of this new law affect its ties perhaps with the international community? I mean, there are already world leaders who claim that the law might be a problem for the one country, two system framework.
Indeed, now as before, and even historically, if we go back 2 or 3 centuries, nations want to trade with China and to access its staggering huge market. However, China does seem to have a rather dismal record in terms of keeping faith, at least in the eyes of those who have called for China to observe the Sino-British Joint Declaration, which China dismissed as a historical document. Similar questions have been raised over the treatment of Tibetans and the Uyghurs. And to the list, one can add the tensions with Thailand and Vietnam over the Mekong River Dam, among others. Passing the Hong Kong security laws will undoubtedly make the international community more guarded in their dealings with China, whether these countries appear cowed or outraged. More drastically, if China's move triggers sanctions that collapse the Hong Kong economy, there may be ripples that would spread far and wide, but ultimately, I think, hurting China more than others. Security laws are found in the US, the UK, and many other places, but in these places, there are checks and balances in free media, independent judiciary, and so on. These conditions do not appear present in China and maybe also not in Hong Kong anymore. Without autonomy in Hong Kong, it seems to me that the international community must deal directly with China's concept of trade and fairness, China's view of intellectual property, China's sense of law and justice. Is the international community prepared and willing and aware? So Germany's Merkel is reported on Bloomberg saying the European Union has strategic interest in maintaining cooperation with China. So one has to wait and see.
I see. Going back to trade, Professor, COVID-19 has disrupted the global economy. How do you assess Hong Kong's economic health at this point?
Well, if the authorities are to be believed, Hong Kong's economy would be better than before because of the security laws and because China has taken care of the pandemic and there are no new cases left nationwide. Everything is normal and everything would resume at a faster pace. Education in Hong Kong would be better and more orderly, routing out all free radicals, and everyone would love and respect the anthem. However, given the pandemic situations globally, what would a rational person think? Well, throughout the pandemic, I noticed one major bottom-up coordinated effort in keeping the Hong Kong economy afloat. It is called the Yellow Economic Circle, where Hong Kongers sympathetic to the protests support businesses that support the protests. I don't know how successful they are, but they have at least gotten quite many responses from the authorities. For example, the CCTV news reported that the Yellow Economic Circle is seditious, pushing for Hong Kong independence. I can't see that connection, but I do see Hong Kongers keeping businesses afloat, keeping businesses they support afloat. And I don't think that is a bad thing for the economy, right?
All right, Professor Lee Hee-wan, we thank you very much for joining us at this hour live from Hong Kong.
Thank you. It's very privileged to be with everyone. Stay safe and stay healthy.
You too, Professor. Now, we are going to go back now to the regular briefing by the government on the COVID-19 situation here in Korea. The briefing was initially scheduled for 2:10, but it was pushed to 2:20, which is precisely the time right now. So we are hoping that the briefing will start. We have footage from the briefing area right now. The official has yet to come to the podium. Oh, the briefing is here. We'll come back to you afterwards. Thank you.
Let us now begin our regular briefing on the COVID-19 response here in South Korea. As of May 29th midnight, we have 58 new cases, and the total number of confirmed cases now stands at 11,402. 23 more people have fully recovered, and right now 90.9% have made full recovery, and we have a total of 770 people in quarantine. Out of the 58 new cases, 3 were imported, while 55 were local transmissions. And of the imported cases, 2 were from America and 1 from Bangladesh. And following are some updates about the local transmissions. At the Gyeonggi Bucheon City Kupang Logistics Center, we have a total of 102 confirmed cases so far. And at the site, we ask all of the people who have been working there on starting from the 12th of May to get tested. And of these confirmed cases, 62 are the workers who have working there, and 30 people are the contacts. And Gyeonggi-do Province has 42 of the patients, and Seoul has 17. And starting from the 12th of May, if you have been working at the Kupang Logistics Center, KCDC requests that everyone to get tested as soon as possible and get self-quarantine. And if there is an healthcare worker or student or school staff member among family, we ask them to limit their work. And as for the Itaewon Club case, we have 5 new cases as of yesterday. And right now, the total number stands at 266. And as for the chains of transmission, we have 96 who are the visitors, and 170 of them are the contacts, including members of the family. And we have 1 more confirmed case for the biblical study group, and a total of 13 have been confirmed. And the latest person has been made contact with the person who is a member at the Jusarang Church in Gyeonggi-do Province. And at the Seoul Yeongdeung-pogu district, we have identified a total of 7 confirmed cases at one of the private academies there. They are teachers and students, and we are doing the testings so far. 5 of them are from Incheon City and 2 are from Seoul. And we are also doing the contact tracing for these people as well. And in order to effectively stop further local transmissions of COVID-19, the KCDC is conducting mass testing of persons who visited public venues and events visited by confirmed COVID-19 cases. So if you have visited such places during the same time, we ask you to get tested at the screening clinic as soon as possible, regardless of symptoms. And the KCDC is also requesting reflecting the opinions of the experts, and we will be asking for the approval of imports of the remdesivir. And we have analyzed that remdesivir is effective for treating the pneumonia among COVID-19 patients, and we have garnered the attentions and the answers of the experts that these drugs need to be imported. And in the metropolitan area, we are currently implementing enhanced quarantine measures until the 14th of June. And lately, we see a high increase in the number of cases clustered in the metropolitan area, and among 88% of them are in the metropolitan area. And they were from the clubs and other nightlife venues, entertainment sites, and academies, as well as restaurants and PC rooms and so forth. And we ask all of these multi-use facilities to also continue to abide by the administrative orders that are in place, and we ask these facilities to suspend operations for the next 2 weeks. And if they do choose to be open, we ask you to have a correct visitor log, and we ask you to have wear face masks and also screen everyone's temperature, and please comply strictly with other quarantine measures as well. And as for these facilities, we will be carrying out regular on-site inspections, and if they operate without complying to these quarantine rules, we could also have penalties. And the business establishments, we ask for people to wear face masks and when using indoor break rooms, changing rooms, or other publicly shared indoors areas. Also, indoor smoking rooms should be prohibited, while outdoor areas should be utilized. And commute buses should also have hand sanitizers in place and disinfect regularly. And cafeterias should operate in time shifts and install dividers between seats, or people need to sit in one line in alternating arrangements to avoid sitting face to face. And we also ask religious facilities to utilize the means of online streaming, and please refrain from small gatherings as well. And if you do have a physical gathering, please take good care of the visitors and the participants, and please have a distancing with each other, and please refrain from group eating or any other activities that increase the risks of droplet infections. And as we see an increase in the number of cases in the metropolitan area, the KCDC asks all of the members of the public who are living in the metropolitan area to refrain from going outdoors and going to gatherings. And if you belong to high-risk groups, please do not go to a poorly ventilated enclosed space frequented by many people. And if you need to go to these places, do wear face masks. Moreover, if you have come in close contact with a large number of unspecified people in an enclosed or confined space, you need to get tested at a screening clinic as well. And if you have two or more people within a household or social group developing COVID-19 symptoms, you need to get tested as well. We highlighted this multiple times during our briefing, but the metropolitan area has more than 70% of the latest COVID-19 cases. And looking at the infection routes, they are bars, buffets, restaurants, PC rooms, religious groups, and private academies. And these are the multi-use facilities that are frequented by our people. This means that everywhere we go are highly prone to infections. If there is only a single person of infection, we also will be prone to the high risk of infection. So the next 2 weeks will be very crucial for the government and the people. And in order to curb the further spread, the following 2 weeks will be very important. If we fail to contain the virus during the next 2 weeks, we believe that we will require more stricter measures. If we fail to comply and fail to distinguish at an early pace the patients, we will be also inflicting bigger damages for the society. So please comply with our epidemiological investigations and our quarantine measures. During the weekend, please refrain from going outdoors and large gatherings as well. Thank you very much.
Right, that was Chung Kyung, the head of KCDC, with the Friday afternoon briefing. So do give us a summary of the key announcements.
Well, as we have expected, Chung Eun-kyung focused on the recent cluster infections. First, the one in Bucheon in Gyeonggi-do province, and also the other case in Itaewon. So first off, in relation to that cluster infection at the Kupang distribution center, it looks like 102 people have been confirmed in relation to that case, and 266 people now in total are related to the Itaewon cluster infection. That is 5 more than a day ago. And Chung stressed that anyone who worked at the distribution center in Bucheon should get tested for the virus if they have worked there anytime beginning of May 12th. So that is important as massive testings are currently underway. And also the multi-use facilities are to abide by the government measures until June 14th, which were announced recently, and also which Aram had mentioned before. And Chung also mentioned that this weekend people should refrain from gatherings, especially in the metropolitan area, even if the gatherings are in smaller numbers.
All right, Swa, thank you for that. We'll see you again on Monday.
Thank you.
마스크를 착용하지 않는 승객에 대해서 승차 거부를 하는 경우에도 사업 정지, 가태료 등의 처분을 하지 않도록 안내할 계획입니다.
A patchwork of protective policies adopted by governments worldwide aimed at containing the pandemic has also paved the path to punitive practices. In a more recent case here in Korea, a young man was served a prison term for violating the self-isolation guideline. Now, for more on this, I have Professor John Park from Handong International Law School. Welcome to the program, Professor Park.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And I also have Raphael Rashid, a freelance journalist from the UK. Good to see you again, Raphael.
Hiya, thanks for having me.
Professor Park, starting last month, the government has vowed to punish those who violate self-isolation guidelines. And in a recent case, like I mentioned, a young man was served a prison term for venturing outdoors during his self-isolation period. Please tell us more about this particular case.
Yeah, that's right. The Uijeongbu District Court sentenced just this week a 27-year-old man for violating quarantine with a 4-month sentence. Korea, of course, has been praised in the international community for having no lockdowns, no stay-home orders, but at the same time, there's a zero tolerance policy for violators of quarantine. And some may say that this is kind of draconian to have a 4-month prison sentence meted out, but under the circumstances of a pandemic that is catastrophically affecting so many parts of our society around the world, that this was a message and as well as a deterrent factor for violators, that this is serious and you are to comply with these quarantine rules.
Raphael, what are the legal consequences of violating isolation orders elsewhere around the world?
Yeah, around the world you're having, similar to Korea, you've got a variety of fines, penalties, even prison sentences. As I understand, a man in Singapore was sentenced to 4 weeks in prison for having left his hotel to buy a thermometer and face masks. Maybe even in Myanmar, as I understand, 500 people have been arrested and put into prison for varying periods of time between 1 month and even 1 year. You have many cases of people, being arrested in the US, India, the Philippines. In the Philippines, some human rights watch activists have actually said that some people are being shamed, such as being locked in cages, coffins, and being stripped naked. I mean, that's a bit extreme. And finally, even in North Korea, the authorities there have said that punishment will follow if people do not follow the guidelines, although they haven't specified what punishments they will be. So we're seeing a variety of punishments around the world.
Professor Park, officials here have advised people to wear face masks on all forms of public transportation. How is the public responding to this measure?
I think the public gets A grade from my perspective. Korea, of course, is not socially awkward to wear masks, and Koreans, by and large, were very good at wearing masks in public places, even before this recent order. So it seems as if it's business as usual. Now that they're sort of really more stringently requiring people to do that, I think most people are compliant, as I was traveling up here today. And I think so. The problem, I think, in my household is it's not so much to wear a mask or not to wear a mask, but more which one is my mask, because we were getting masks mixed up. But I think by and large, the Korean population have been excellent, gets an A grade for complying with this new regulation.
Staying with face masks, Raphael, is the wearing of face masks also strongly advised in countries outside of Korea?
Absolutely. The report suggests that at least 50 countries require people to wear face masks. In Singapore, it's compulsory to wear face masks outside, or you risk to be given a penalty of about 250,000 won. In Vietnam, face masks are compulsory to wear in public. In Europe, same thing. In Spain, Italy, you have to wear them in public spaces or where social distancing cannot be performed. In France, public transport, secondary schools, shops, markets are able to tell customers to wear masks, otherwise they're not allowed in. And this is, again, throughout the world, we're seeing these kind of things in Germany, Austria, Slovakia, Colombia. I mean, the list goes on. These measures are being taken seriously to wear face masks.
Professor Park, some claim that the most recent outbreak here in Korea, in the city of Bucheon, at a logistics center, could have or might have been prevented had the patient in Incheon not lied about his whereabouts following his night out at Itaewon. What are the legal consequences of falsifying your information to health authorities who are trying very hard to contain the virus?
Right. The interesting question here is whether he was someone who had to be under quarantine, and technically he was not. But what happens when he is part of an investigation where we're basically doing contact tracing, and the authorities are trying very hard to figure out who went where, and when, etc. I think the individual in question, there are multiple charges here. Individual in question, I think, could face charges for obstruction of justice, obstructing an investigation by lying. He could, perhaps if he was intentional or clearly reckless about this, causing reckless endangerment to others, and possibly even fraud. But I think there is actually a law that covers this provision under the Infectious Disease and Prevention Act that talks about authorities' power to investigate contact tracing or investigate something like this. And if you're to lie or use deceit or fraud or obstruct that investigation, it does carry a penalty of 2 years, up to 2 years incarceration. So it is a serious offense, and I assume that the authorities are looking into this quite carefully because it's caused another significant cluster outbreak in Korea.
Yes, it has. Let's take a moment now to hear from another expert in the academic arena regarding the punitive measures in place to curb the spread of COVID-19. Here's Professor Raj Bala from the University of Kansas School of Law.
Well, there's no one answer for all countries. Different countries have different constitutional structures. Those structures will dictate the response. For example, in the United States, under the First Amendment, there's a guarantee of freedom of assembly. So infringing on that right to assemble is very difficult, and to prosecute people for doing so, and much less imposing a penalty that's draconian, like the death penalty or serious imprisonment, it would be all but unheard of, and probably also violate a different amendment, the Eighth Amendment on cruel and unusual punishment. Other countries that are less democratic, more authoritarian, may seek to impose severe punishments for violating quarantine orders, countries such as China, for example. So again, there's no one single answer. I would, though, conclude by pointing out the terrible irony of imposing the death penalty for these kinds of violations when, in fact, we're trying to fight the COVID pandemic.
Professor Park, let's turn our focus now to lawsuits arising from COVID-19. Quite a number of university students around the world are filing lawsuits against their schools, demanding refunds in tuition, claiming that the education they've received online has been quite limited or restricted, so to speak. You are a professor. What is your take on this?
I am, and I think I should probably say that I'm somewhat, as a faculty member, sort of stuck in the middle between the university administration and the students. I can sort of see both sides of the argument. From the institution's point of view, we're still providing lectures, we're still providing classrooms, credits for the tuition that's being provided. It's from the institution's point of view, look, we are providing this, it's but for the fact that the regulation the government is actually not disallowing our ability to open the facilities to students, but we're making so many other alternative ways to do what we need to do to educate the students. From the students' perspective, of course, they have valid concerns too, because it's not just lectures on Zoom or video conferencing to hear lectures. They have to have access to services, of course, access to facilities, access to professors, not just through video. And so there's valid considerations there. I think legally speaking, the students' concerns, while justified, I think that the legal footing might be weak. But I think that doesn't mean that the institutions should simply ignore and say, oh, that's too bad, we have a pandemic going on, but to try to find ways to help, particularly students who are disadvantaged and students who might have financial struggles because their families are affected by this, to find some creative solutions to help those students who may be in that situation.
Right.
So.
Staying with lawsuits, Raphael, governments of 8 countries, including the UK, as well as private entities, have filed lawsuits against China for its initial handling of the virus. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, as you mentioned, entities and groups have been filing lawsuits or are trying to file lawsuits against China for having failed to allegedly not take precautionary measures to contain the spread of the virus. And actually, I read one report saying that these lawsuits, if you to put them all together, could amount to $100 trillion in compensation, which would be about 7 times the GDP of China, or at least 7 years of it. I'm not too sure if these numbers are accurate, but it definitely shows you that people are not happy and people are taking actions. Actually, the British conservative think tank, the Henry Jackson Society, has claimed in a report that the spread of the infection, allegedly because of China, has cost the G7 countries 4 trillion won alone, and that China should be be sued under international law. I'm not too sure if this is feasible, but definitely there are a lot of these cases around the world. Even I read a case, Egyptian lawyers have threatened to sue the Chinese leader Xi Jinping for $10 trillion for his alleged role in spreading the virus. It remains to be seen whether these lawsuits can actually take place.
And staying with that, Professor Park, what are your thoughts on these lawsuits?
Yeah, so from the U.S. perspective, there has been, of course, class action lawsuits filed against the Chinese government and even the lab and other related authorities who may have something to do with this. But it's interesting that certain states in the U.S., like Missouri and Mississippi and others, have also filed lawsuits as well against the Chinese government. The problem with many of these lawsuits is that China is a sovereign country, and there's an act called the U.S. Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act that has parameters that limit the ability for individuals to sue another sovereign country entity. And so just before you get to the cause and the harm and the injury that's been caused, you have to pass the threshold to be able to say procedurally that there's jurisdiction to even to engage in the lawsuit. So those are some, I think, issues And so I think there's a high likelihood that some of these things could be dismissed even procedurally.
Now, Professor Park, we actually asked this same question to Professor Bala, and this is what he had to say.
Well, they are politically attractive given the outrage at the way the Chinese Communist Party dealt with the COVID pandemic, or at least allegedly did, in late 2019 and early 2020. However, legally, they are what we might call a nice try, but not likely to succeed. The reason is if China is sued in, say, Korean court or U.S. court, in other words, a foreign court, China will invoke what we call in international law the state immunity doctrine, which basically renders foreign governments immune from suit in a local court. And there are two exceptions to that state immunity doctrine that might be relevant. One is if China were deemed to have engaged in commercial transactions. The other is if it were deemed to have engaged in tortious behavior. But those exceptions usually are narrowly construed. So most likely, unless China itself waived sovereign immunity, the suits would not proceed. They would be dismissed.
I say, like you mentioned, Professor Park, it's very less likely that the suit will go forward then. All right, Professor Park, thank you so much for your time today. And Raphael, thank you as always for being with us.
Thank you.
Right, we end the program on that note. Infections here in Korea on the rise, and health authorities are calling on the public to abide by quarantine measures as they seek to establish a new normal in the academic arena. Be sure to avoid confined and congested places and to wear a mask when venturing outdoors. Also, do reach out to us with your thoughts and inquiries on our social media accounts or our homepage, arirang.com. Have a safe weekend.